Hello students, in this class I'll start the topic bioelectric potentials. So in my previous lectures I discussed about sources of biomedical signals. So I've already discussed about sources of biomedical signals, and in that I discussed about bioelectric signals. So now in today's class I'll be discussing in detail about the bioelectric signals, or you can say the bioelectric potentials. So basically, what are bioelectric potentials? So what happens, as I've told you, that inside our body there are various physiological systems like cardiovascular system, respiratory system, etc. So certain systems of the body, what they do, they generate some signals, and these signals are called monitoring signals, because by measuring these signals you can know the function of that system. What I'm trying to say is that there are certain systems in the body, that there are certain physiological systems in the body where there are certain special types of cells. For example, the cells might be the nerve cells, or they might be the muscle cells. So there are some special types of cells. So what happens, these special types of cells, because of the electrochemical activity of these special types of cells, ionic voltages or ionic potentials get developed across this cell, and these ionic potentials are bioelectric potentials. Again I am repeating what happens. Suppose in the nervous system we have nerve cells. So these nerve cells, they are special types of cells, and because of the electrochemical activity by these nerve cells, what happens, an ionic potential gets developed across this cell, and this ionic potential is the bioelectric potential. And when the number of these type of special types of cells produce this bioelectric potential, we get bioelectric signal. So the signal that we are getting because of the electrical activity of a cell or of a system is the bioelectric signal. Now you might have understood what is bioelectric potential. Now this bioelectric potential is, or you can say this bioelectric signal acts as the monitoring signal of that system. If somehow you can measure this bioelectric signal, then you can know whether that system is functioning properly or not. So for that we have electrodes. What is the role of electrodes? Electrodes convert the ionic potentials into the electric current. Like, as you know, transducers, what is the role of transducers? They convert one form of energy into another form. And if we strictly speak in terms of electrical and electronic measurements, then what is the role of transducer? It converts any physical quantity into an electrical quantity. Similarly, electrodes, what they do, they convert ionic potentials into the electrical signal, and then these electrical signals can be displayed, and we can have a meaningful data regarding this bioelectric signals. And this bioelectric signal, when measured, they can be used by the physician to diagnose whether the system is functioning properly or not, and if the system is not functioning properly, it can be used for the treatment of various diseases. So now you have understood what is the importance of bioelectric potential or bioelectric signal. They act as the monitoring signal of the physiological systems of the body. They convey the information whether the physiological systems are working properly or not. So this was all about bioelectric potential. Now I will be discussing in detail how bioelectric potentials are generated or created. What is the source of bioelectric potential? Now what happens, as I have told you, that there are certain special types of cells like muscle cells, like nerve cells, etc. These cells, they are encased by a semi-permeable membrane. Here you can see this is a cell, and these cells, they are encased by a semi-permeable membrane. Now, as you can see, the name itself depicts semi-permeable. Semi-permeable means it will allow some components to pass through it, and it won't allow some components to pass through it. It will show the semi-permeability nature. That is, it will allow some components to pass through it, and it will block some components. It will block the other components. So these special types of cells, they are encased by semi-permeable membrane. Now the fluids inside this semi-permeable membrane are called the intracellular fluid. Intracellular fluid, whereas the body fluids that are outside the semi-permeable membrane, they are the extracellular fluid. The fluids inside the cell are the intracellular fluid, the fluids outside the cell, they are the extracellular fluids. Now these fluids are conductive in nature. How they are conductive? Because they are carrying ions. What are ions? Ions are charged atoms. Any atom, if it loses an electron, it will get positive charge. We can say this is a positive ion. If an atom gains an electron, it will get negative charge. We will say it is a negative ion. So these fluids, they are carrying charges. They are carrying charges in the form of ions. That's why they are conductive in nature. And related to this bioelectric potential, related to this body fluids, the principal ions are sodium ion, potassium ion, and chloride ion. As you can see here, we have sodium ion, potassium ion, and chloride ion. So these are the principal ions with respect to the body fluids. So in body fluids, these are the principal ions. Now, for these type of excitable cells, special type of cells, what happens? This semi-permeable membrane, it allows potassium as well as chloride ions to pass through it, but it does not allow sodium ions to pass through it. Sodium is also a positive ion. As you can see, sodium is also a positive ion. Potassium is also a positive ion. Chloride is a negative ion. So what will happen? This semi-permeable membrane, it has the nature that it will allow only potassium and chloride ions to pass through it, but it won't allow sodium ions to pass through it. As a result, there is larger amount of sodium ions present outside the cell. There is a larger amount of sodium ions. As you can see, they are present outside the cell. Now, since the various ions, they seek a balance in terms of concentration and electric charge, and because of the inability of sodium ions to penetrate inside the cell, what will happen? A larger amount of sodium ions will be present outside the cell, that is, there is a concentration difference will occur. And because there are larger number of sodium ions outside the cell, and sodium ions are positive, means there is a lot of positive charge outside the cell. Now, in order to balance this charge, what will happen? Potassium ions will try to rush into the cell. This potassium ions will try to rush into the cell to balance the positive charge that has been created by the number of sodium ions outside the cell. But then also the charge balance cannot be achieved, because when larger amount of potassium ions will penetrate inside the cell, what will happen? A concentration gradient will occur. concentration imbalance for potassium ions will occur, which won't allow further potassium ions to penetrate into the cell and maintain the and to acquire the charge balance. So what will happen? Equilibrium will reach with a potential difference across the membrane that is negative on the inside of the cell as compared to the positive on the outside of the cell. So again I am repeating what is happening, what are the cases that have arrived. First, there is lot of sodium ions outside the cell, that is concentration of sodium ions is more outside the cell, because of that the positive charge is more outside the cell. Then to balance that positive charge, to balance the charge across the cell, what will happen? Positive potassium ions will try to rush into the cell, but because of that concentration imbalance of potassium ions will occur, and because of that charge balance will not be achieved, and as a result equilibrium is reached with a potential difference across the membrane that is negative on the inside and positive on the outside, and this membrane potential is called resting potential of the cell, and the cell will maintain this resting potential. The cell will maintain this resting resting potential until it is being affected by certain external stimuli. Now, since the this membrane potential, as you can see here, this resting potential, how we will measure this resting potential? It will be measured from inside the cell with respect to the body fluids outside the cell. You can see these are the body fluids outside the cell, this is the cell. So resting potential will be measured from inside the cell with respect to the body fluids outside the cell, and since the inside of the cell is negative and outside of the cell is positive, so the resting potential will always be negative, because it is measured from inside the cell with respect to the outside, and the inside is negative, so the resting potential will always come out to be negative. And this resting potential for various types of cells so measured comes out to be minus 60 millivolt to minus 100 millivolt, minus 60 millivolt to minus 100 millivolt. The range of the resting potential for various types of cells is this, minus 60 millivolt to minus 100 millivolt. And the cell, when the cell is in resting state, means when you can measure the resting potential of the cell, at that time the cell is said to be polarized. So a cell in the resting state is said to be polarized. So I am ending this class here. In the next class I will tell you about depolarization, I will tell about action potential. Here I have told you only about the resting potential. Thank you.